Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Germany's Chancellor visits flood-hit areas, with her government criticised over the lack of warning for those affected.
Our other headlines: global stocks rebound after their biggest sell-off this year, but the pandemic continues to spook investors.
UK MPs consider tight new controls on migrants as record numbers arrive by boat. And blast off for Bezos, the world's richest man, lands back on Earth after 11 minutes. Is this the best use of his cash? Chancellor Angela Merkel is visiting some of the worst-hit areas in Germany after a deluge laid waste to large swathes of the country.
Nearly 200 people have now died in flooding that's devastated parts of Western Europe, and questions are being asked about why one of the world's richest countries wasn't better prepared. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray in Flammersheim in Germany. Trent, how has Chancellor Merkel been received by people there, and what did she have to offer them?
Well, Jamie, it is Chancellor Merkel's second visit to this flood-hit region to get an update on how recovery efforts are going. She's sometimes nicknamed here in Germany Mutti or Mother, but I think on this visit people will want more than consolation. They want an explanation as to how this could have happened. German government is promising an investigation into understanding how weather warnings didn't trickle their way down to communities like this one, which have been so heavily hit. And Chancellor Merkel is also promising funding to help get these communities back up on their feet.
Almost a week after deadly floods devastated northwest Germany, communities continue the painstaking task of cleaning out their homes and salvaging what's left of their possessions. The repair bill from the disaster continues to climb, with roads, rail and electricity networks still down. Arriving in the town of Bad Münstereifel to inspect the damage, Chancellor Angela Merkel came armed with her government chequebook, pledging almost $500 million in emergency funding to flood victims.
Tomorrow at the cabinet meeting in Berlin, we will set a programme on motion about financial help. It is about unbureaucratic immediate aid which will be paid out, together with the state who will pass that legislation on Thursday, as the Prime Minister told me. The financial aid must go to the people as soon as possible, who more often than not have nothing more than what they wear on their bodies.
Piles of debris line many of the streets in the affected region, awaiting collection from stretched recovery crews.
It's just unimaginable. I mean, these are just things, but we know many people who've been much worse affected. But each object here has somebody's memories in it.
This does remain a real multi-agency recovery effort. Fire and rescue services from neighbouring states are here to help. We've got a number of ambulances as well. Even the German military is on scene providing logistical support, and the German Red Cross is helping coordinate donations. One of the most in-demand items is bottled water, because authorities say that in many areas the tap water is still unsafe to drink. Questions remain over why warnings weren't widely shared in low-lying communities ahead of the downpours. So far, officials have defended their handling of the crisis, saying warnings were sent to local authorities. But political pressure is growing in Germany over the government response, with opposition parties pushing for the country to be better prepared when the next crisis strikes.
Trent, Chancellor Merkel was accompanied by Armin Laschet, the front-runner to replace her when she stands down. How will the government and its handling of these floods affect his chances and his popularity?
Yeah, well, that's right, Jamie. It's impossible to look at this crisis not through the political lens, because in just over 2 months' time, Germans will go to the polls to vote on a new government and a new chancellor. And Armin Laschet, the premier of this region, is the CDU candidate to replace Chancellor Merkel. Now, he was already struggling in the polls somewhat. Of course, coming in the shadow of Chancellor Merkel was never going to be an easy task. But there's been an additional unwelcome distraction because over the weekend he was seen laughing in the background of a press conference of the German president, and that has been really controversial here because obviously with hundreds of people killed, people are very sad and very devastated in this region. So to see their premier laughing at the back of a press conference has not gone down well. This crisis, I suspect, will in many ways dictate where the election campaign goes from here. But it's not the only crisis Germany is facing right now. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic is continuing. And because of this particular disaster, there are now concerns that there could be a surge in fresh cases with a number of people missing their vaccination appointments because of the floods, and also rescuers working in close confinement with each other. So the health service here is preparing special mobile teams to come into this region to try and distribute coronavirus vaccines. One less thing for people here to have to think about. Jamie.
Trent Murray in Germany, thank you very much.
The EU has threatened to fine Poland over its perceived attack on judicial independence and accused Hungary of failing to stop corruption. The two countries were singled out for criticism in an EU report, which could help determine whether they receive billions of dollars in EU funds to help recover from the pandemic. Let's talk now to our correspondent Penelope Liesch in Budapest. So, Penny, the EU is threatening legal action against Poland. What more can you tell us?
This is a very long-running case and a long-running dispute between Poland and the European Union, Robin. We've seen this going on between a number of different court cases, a number of different rulings. Basically, Poland recently brought in tribunals to discipline judges within the country. The EU's top court, the European Court of Justice, quickly found that that breached EU law by undermining judicial independence. Now, originally, Poland was asked to stop using those tribunals immediately. However, the Polish government continued using them all the way up till last week when we saw another ruling by the ECJ saying again that they were breaching the rule of law and must stop using those tribunals. Just the day before, Poland had held their own constitutional hearing around which area of law had primacy, Poland or the European Union, finding that Poland came out on top in that respect, and that's why they were going to continue to use this tribunal. Now, this is the strongest action that we've seen today, with the European Commission saying that they will ask for the ECJ to fine Poland, to fine them. We're not quite sure how much yet, but a significant amount of money if they do not implement the changes from the European Court of Justice decision in the next 3 weeks. So we will wait and see what happens with that around the 16th of August.
Poland needs to inform us about the measures foreseen to that effect by the 16th of August, as requested by the court. Failing that, the Commission will request the European Court of Justice to impose a penalty payment on Poland. Equally, if Poland does not confirm that it will take all the necessary measures to fully comply with the judgment of the 15th of July regarding the disciplinary chamber, the Commission will launch an infringement procedure under Article 260/2, meaning that also in this case we will ask for financial sanctions if Poland does not remedy the situation by the 16th of August.
And Penny, the EU also had a rebuke for Hungary.
Well, this annual rule of law report, the second one ever, came out today, and it was very strongly calling out Hungary and Poland. Hungary specifically around failing to implement measures to safeguard against corruption in the country regarding where government funds are going, particular concerns about favouritism within Viktor Orban's government, that those in his close circle are getting government funds and a lot of government business. Also around the shrinking media freedom and the size of the media in the country, concerns there that the government is putting a lot of advertising money into media that are pro their messaging, and it is shrinking and threatening the independent media here. Also, issues have been raised about the obstruction of independent media and threats to journalists as well. So it is some very serious issues. We know that Hungary is already required to reply within less than 2 months, as well as Poland, about a law that they've implemented, an anti-LGBT law that restricts the rights of the LGBT community in regards to those under 18 not being able to access any any education in regards to those issues and gender change. So we know that Hungary needs to reply to that in the next couple of months, or there'll be further sanctions on them as well. But we could see this ultimately meaning that Hungary and Poland can't access their EU recovery budgets from COVID, which are worth billions of dollars, because this particular report, as well as many others, are being taken into consideration to make sure that governments are following the rule of law if they are to receive that financial assistance. Robin?
Penelope Liesch in Budapest. Thank you.
China has denied it was behind a major cyber attack on Microsoft, rebutting allegations that it engaged in state-sponsored cyber attacks.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the accusations made by the United States and its allies lack evidence and amount to political smearing.
China will never accept groundless accusations from the US and its allies. China firmly opposes and has cracked down on cyber attacks of every kind. We will never encourage, support or connive in any hacking activity. Our position on this is consistent and clear. In fact, the United States is the world's biggest source of cyber attacks. Our data shows that 5.31 million servers within China were controlled by overseas malicious programs in 2020. And the United States and its NATO allies are the top sources for these malicious programs.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, mandatory COVID vaccine passports at UK nightclubs and other crowded events. Not everyone is happy.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Global stock markets have given investors the jitters over the last 24 hours. Sharp declines in Europe and the US were triggered by fears that rising COVID cases will hamper recovery. After the Dow Jones saw its worst day in 9 months and almost $60 billion were wiped off the UK's FTSE 100, where are we now? Well, let's go to New York and talk to our correspondent John Terrett, who will no doubt let us know why. But first, let's talk about this Monday sell-off. What's behind it?
Do you want to know what the jitters looks like? That's what it actually looks like when you get the jitters. That's what we were all doing here yesterday, because we weren't expecting it to happen quite as quickly as it did. And also at the same time, the sell-off was not that much of a deal. Let me explain more about that in just a second. It's kind of been on the cards, you see, because a lot of stocks are at the top end of expectations. People have been warning about this for a long time. And what always is needed is a prompter. Something always has to happen to make it happen, as it were, a sell-off like that. And in this case, it was the Delta variant. Now, I said to you last week or the week before that the Delta variant was getting talked about in the United States, and now it is very much here, and it appears to be prevalent in the Midwest of the country, and particularly in the South, but only, as far as if I understand it correctly, only among people who have not been vaccinated. And the vaccines do conquer the Delta variant in the sense that they stop you dying from it or stop you from getting very ill. But there are plenty of people here, as you know, who have not been vaccinated, and it is they who are getting it and causing a surge in the Delta variant. So that rattled investors on Monday because they were very concerned about the recovery being hobbled, not just in this country, but also around the world. And I think also, Robin, there was some profit taking because it's the summer here. It was a summer Monday. And the real growth that you get in this economy is usually in the first half of the year, not so much in the second half of the year. And we now are in the second half of the year. So I think there was an opportunity to take some money off the table and possibly reinvest it. The banks were hit hard to the tune of 3%. We had all those reopening stocks like hotels and airlines and cruise lines all down. Energy was down 4% after OPEC began opening up the taps again, albeit slowly. But as I said at the top, it wasn't quite a correction, or at least it isn't so far. The Dow was down 725 points, that's 2%. Boeing, Honeywell, General Motors, Goldman Sachs, United Health, all down. It was the worst day since October of 2020, so that's 8 months. But the S&P 500, the broad market, was down 1.2%, all 11 sectors in the red on Monday. But it is up 13% since the beginning of the year. And I think the reason that this has not transpired into any kind of correction or appears to be heading in that direction is because there's still plenty of support from the Federal Reserve, still plenty of money out there, and no sign of tapering kicking in anytime soon. Robin.
So, John, what's happening today? How have we moved on from those jitters?
Well, this is the thing. And the trouble is, what I do for you is what I always like to refer to as the fog of news. You know, you hear people talk about the fog of war. Well, this is the fog of news here because we're dealing with stuff as it's coming at us on a daily basis. So yesterday we had a 2% sell-off. Today we have a 2% increase on the Dow. So go figure. I mean, the Dow is presently up 596 points, 1.7%. NASDAQ and the S&P up by a similar amount. So they've effectively wiped out the losses of yesterday. That does not mean that there won't be a sell-off or there won't be, jitters in the future. I think we're at a crossroads here regarding inflation, regarding earnings, regarding jobs, regarding possible tapering off. I think the truth is nobody really knows. I honestly think that's the truth. And when you are on the floor of the exchange here, you get so many different views about what is actually happening. And I think the only thing I can tell you is that the president spoke yesterday and said, look, don't worry about inflation. It's transitory. And the Federal Reserve is saying, look, it will be high until the end of the year, but then it definitely will moderate. In the meantime, the folks out on the streets are having to pay more for things like food and apparel and, bizarrely, used cars. That's to do with the microchip shortage, by the way. And, of course, airline tickets. But we are told all of those are going to come down by the end of the year. So we're kind of left in limbo. We just have to wait and see. And I'm sorry to leave it like that, but I'm afraid we just have to wait and see, Robin.
John, great to hear from you. John Terrett there in New York.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson was reluctant to impose a lockdown in the early stages of the pandemic because he thought the virus would only kill elderly people.
It's the latest allegation made by his former top advisor, Dominic Cummings, who's given his first one-on-one television interview on the government's response to the pandemic.
The Prime Minister's attitude was that essentially the first lockdown was a disaster. We should never have done it. His attitude at that point was a weird mix of partly it's all nonsense and lockdowns don't work anyway, and partly, well, this is terrible, but the people who are dying are essentially all over 80, and we can't kill the economy just because of people dying over 80.
Concerns have been raised over the UK government's plan to make COVID vaccine passports mandatory at nightclubs. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says full vaccination will be a condition of entry to clubs and other venues with large crowds by September. Tony Sophocles is Strategic Affairs Director at UK Hospitality. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. How much of a blow is this for the UK's nightclubs industry?
Thanks for having us on. It's a massive blow, really. I mean, coming only 17 hours after Freedom Day had started. Bear in mind that this is the part of the hospitality sector that has exclusively been shut since the very beginning of the pandemic. So to have, Freedom Day opening and then have the rug pulled from under their feet was something of a shock, yes.
Obviously, very tough times for nightclubs and many people who work in them. I guess if UK government was here and many doctors in the medical profession, they'd say to you, health is more important than the unfortunate difficulties of the nightclub industry.
As a sector, we absolutely agree, which is why it seems absurd that Freedom Day was planned and happened, and then all of a sudden there is this decision that goes completely in the other direction, days after we've been talking with the government about exactly how we could work on a voluntary basis.
The UK has marked so-called Freedom Day, the supposed ending of restrictions. How does it feel in the hospitality sector?
I think the broad hospitality sector welcomed it very much. There was slight trepidation. I mean, firstly, you must remember that there are about 12,000 venues that only opened their doors for the first time yesterday, and that must have been a magnificent feeling after 16 months of closure. And then those others, could finally start to inch towards operating at normal capacity, given the different retention, I guess, of the measures that they might have kept from before. So yeah, we are a debt-laden sector with about £8 billion of accrued debts in rents and loans, and so people are very keen to get their staff back into work, get going, and start to drive a national economy recovery.
And what is your sense of what the new normal looks like? Do you sense that in cities in particular, hospitality will return to pre-pandemic norms?
For those venues that have survived, I think it's only a matter of time before that does happen. But that is the crucial part about how long it will take. These are long-suffering and really struggling businesses in many instances, and I think you mentioned city centres there. There's clearly a job to be done in terms of consumer confidence, getting people back into city centres. A lot of that depends on how confident they are, for example, in London to get on the tube. A lot of work's going into that from other parties. It's not going to be an easy journey, without a doubt. It takes quite some time. We're still a long way off of having pre-COVID levels of inbound tourism, and I suspect that's going to be a good year or 2 years before we're up to those sort of levels. But slowly, hopefully, as long as we don't have any reversals in the way that direction of travel, then we'll get there eventually.
And it's very difficult to give a broad brush snapshot of the whole UK industry, but I mean, how damaging has the last 16 or 18 months been for the industry?
Well, I suppose one really quite striking figure is the fact that we know that at least £90 billion worth in sales were lost. There were £87 billion lost up until the point of where the delay in Freedom Day was given. There was about £3 billion more there. So it's that's a hell of a lot of sales lost. A lot of jobs were put at risk. A lot of jobs, unfortunately, were lost. So this isn't just about businesses. It's about communities, pubs, restaurants, all the places that we love to go to, are the fabric of our local communities. And we want those. Everybody wants those to survive.
Good to see you, and thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. All the best.
Thank you for having us.
Staff in England's National Health Service could be offered a 3% pay rise, despite the government previously saying it could only afford 1%.
Many, though, say it's still not enough reward for the efforts of frontline workers during the pandemic. Doctors and nurses have been protesting in London, demanding higher pay. Louis Jabarkle reports.
Dozens of doctors and nurses from across the UK have gathered here in London to march up to Downing Street, the Prime Minister's official residence. With them, they'll take a petition signed by more than 800,000 people calling for a 15% pay rise for health workers in England. In March, the government said all it could afford was a 1% increase. For many nurses, that would mean an extra few $100s a year. With inflation rising, that's effectively a pay cut. Following widespread criticism and an independent review of that decision, officials are now planning a 3% increase instead. But for many people here, that doesn't go far enough.
Because I've basically been living this situation from hospital to care home, hospital to care home for the last 20 months. I know how hard the nurses have been working in the NHS.
We've lost 20% of our pay over the past decade. And after everything NHS workers have done in the pandemic, we believe we deserve better than this government is giving us.
You're talking about low-paid workers that are providing a professional service for people in this country, putting their lives on the line, medically qualified and stuff like that. And to be fair, the wages are never livable.
The Royal College of Nursing, which represents the sector, says staff should get a 12.5% pay rise, as many have had to go above and beyond, especially during the fight against COVID-19. But the pandemic has also led to unprecedented economic damage, with a pay freeze in place across the rest of the public sector. For many people here, though, the past year or so has been the most challenging and exhausting of their professional lives. And there appears to be a lot of public support for the protesters here, too. A nationwide campaign clapping for healthcare workers became a weekly occurrence last year, drawing in hundreds of thousands of people. There's also the threat of strike action to consider. Unions representing doctors and nurses say they're willing to move ahead with stronger measures if their demands aren't met. With the virus once again spreading rapidly across the UK, this is a political decision that could have far-reaching consequences, not just for those directly impacted, but for the millions of others in the country who rely on the public health service. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
UBS has reported a surge in second quarter profits, jumping 63% to $2 billion. Analysts say the Swiss bank has surpassed expectations as buoyant markets continue to help the world's largest wealth manager generate higher earnings. Shares in UBS rose 4.1%.
EasyJet is ramping up summer flights, expecting to operate 60% of its pre-pandemic capacity between July and September. That's a big jump from the 17% in the previous quarter and follows a surge in bookings. But as the European travel recovery begins, the low-cost carrier says UK customers are being left behind because of travel restrictions.
Volvo Trucks has become the latest firm to warn that a global microchip shortage is putting the brakes on its recovery. The Swedish company saw profits miss expectations in the second quarter. That's despite truck orders rising 143% on last year. Volvo has been forced to mothball several of its global plants.
China has unveiled the world's first high-speed maglev train capable of travelling at 600 kilometres per hour. Developed solely in China, the train levitates above the track. It will now enter a lengthy testing period before going into service. Once intercity maglev tracks are built, it's expected to become the world's fastest ground transportation.
Europe's airlines are under pressure to cut emissions. Now, some in the industry say it's time to overhaul air traffic control systems to help reduce pollution. The former boss of British Airways wants a more integrated system, which it's claimed could shave 10% off emissions. To find out more, go to europe.cgtn.com. And remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, should they or shouldn't they? At the 11th hour, there's still a debate on whether the Olympics should go ahead.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination. but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, making it loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I can feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: Germany's Chancellor visits flood-hit areas following criticism of her government over the lack of warning for those affected. Global stocks have rebounded after their biggest sell-off this year, but the pandemic continues to spook investors. And the world's richest man lands back on Earth after his 11-minute space flight. Jeff Bezos says it's the best day ever. The UK Parliament has been debating new legislation that could see migrants being imprisoned if they arrive illegally in this country by boat. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says the current asylum policy is broken and that changes are needed to stop criminal trafficking of illegal migrants. Monday saw a record number of people arrive. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been following the story. Andrew, sunny weather, flat seas. This is the time of year that numbers crossing the channel go up, isn't it?
Absolutely, Jamie. There's an area of high pressure stuck over the UK. It's hot, there's no wind, and the channel is completely flat at the moment. It's 20 miles at its narrowest part between here and France, but it can go up to 30 miles and even a bit more than that, depending where you put into the sea from France. And these gangs now that operate this, these illegal gangs that operate these services, if you want to call them that, for the refugees in France, are now becoming adept at pushing people into substandard boats and sending them across the channel to make their way and take their chances. Some of them are picked up by Border Patrol, some of them are rescued by the National Lifeboat Charity, some of them actually make their way all the way to the shores. They're coming from countries like Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq and Iran, and they come on long journeys all the way from the country of origin, often either through Turkey or North Africa, and then across Europe, passing by countries like Italy and France to get to the UK. Monday saw 430, Sunday saw 241. Monday's figure beats the record from September last year of 416. But there needs to be a perspective on this, Jamie. This year in 2021, so far, 6,000 people have come to the UK by boat. In 2020, that's 8,500. But if you look at the Home Office figures and their processing system, there are still 109,000 people having their asylum applications processed in the Home Office, and 79,000 of those have been waiting more than a year to have it done. So there's a huge question over efficiency in the Home Office as well as just these concerns of people seeing boats arriving on British shores. Those numbers are way, way smaller on the other immigration figures that the UK is dealing with.
So a new law being debated and the UK government's new legislation dividing opinions in Parliament again today.
Yeah, long debate been going on today, Jamie, and that's still going to go on probably till about another couple of hours at least. It's the second reading of the Nationalities and Borders Bill. A lot of it contains tweaks to the citizenship legislation, but of course a lot of it is aimed exactly at these migrants coming over the channel. Now, both sides claim that that the system is broken, and they agree with each other on that, and both sides claim that they are acting out of compassion. The government says that it's that sneaking into the UK without permission is unacceptable, and they want to put a prison sentence on that crime of coming into the UK, which people say, well, that means that anyone who rescues them from a boat or anything may also be guilty of helping someone commit a crime. They want the Border Patrol to have more powers to push boats back. They want more power for deportation notices, and they want to also point towards these offshore reception centres, which have become so controversial but haven't really been discussed there. Labour says this is hostile to refugees. These are people who have fled war zones, that have been traumatised, beaten, tortured, assaulted in various camps on their way through to the UK, and they deserve our help. They say that the new bill violates the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1998 Human Rights Act. They say that this is far too harsh a way of dealing with a problem that needs to be dealt with much more compassion and recognition of people's dilemmas and how the UK is best placed to help those people. They point out that Germany, Sweden and Norway, even France, take way more refugees than the UK does. And they dispute this idea from the government that these are economic migrants, people looking for a free lunch, if you like, a way of improving their circumstances. They say they've come from Sudan and Somalia. These are people fleeing terrible circumstances where they may have lost their lives, and certainly their friends may have lost their lives, and certainly they may have lost their homes. And this is something that we need to keep a more compassionate position on in the UK. The debate continues, as I said, Jamie, and that goes on perhaps through this evening, just the second reading of this controversial bill.
Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
The richest man on the planet, Jeff Bezos, has blasted off into space 52 years to the day after he watched Neil Armstrong take the first steps on the moon.
5, 4, command engine start, 2, 1.
On board the New Shepard rocket, built by his company Blue Origin, he was joined by his brother Mark. Travelling with them were the oldest and youngest people to ever go to space. 82-year-old Wally Funk, who trained with NASA in the 60s but was denied a flight because women weren't chosen for missions at the time, and 18-year-old Dutch student Oliver Deeman, who was announced as the fourth passenger last week. After taking in the sights from space and looking down at planet Earth, it was time to come home. Within minutes, the 4 astronauts returned to the Earth's atmosphere, their capsule touching down on the marked location.
And touchdown. Welcome back, New Shepard's first human crew.
Bezos described the event as the best day ever, saying he'd achieved a childhood dream.
It felt so serene and peaceful, and the floating. It's actually much nicer than being in full one gravity. It's a very pleasurable experience, just from the just the way it feels, the tactfulness of it. The most profound piece of it for me was looking out at the Earth and looking at the Earth's atmosphere.
Well, the launch took place in Van Horn in Texas. Our correspondent Hendrik Sabrandi is there for us. Hendrik, we've been watching the pictures. No crew on board, the flight completely automated, but everything seemed to go according to plan.
It certainly did, as far as we can tell. I'm sure they'll be nitpicking this flight afterwards to try to figure out what could be done better. But from a spectator's point of view, it did seem to go perfectly. There was a slight delay in the countdown, about 12 minutes long, so the flight left at about 12 minutes after 8 local time this morning. But once it went off up into the air, it was a spectacular sight. The New Shepard capsule, of course, on top of that rocket, shooting straight up into the Texas sky. Weather was perfect. Basically, the capsule and the rocket went up to about the 75-kilometer mark. At that point, the rocket fell away. The capsule continued on beyond the 100-kilometer mark that's known as the Kármán line, basically where space takes over from Earth's atmosphere. Then at that point, the 4 passengers were weightless for probably 3 or 4 minutes. I imagine some of them did somersaults once they unstrapped their harnesses in the capsule, but very quickly they had to strap themselves back in. The capsule then headed straight back down. Several drogue chutes deployed, followed by the main parachutes, slowing the descent. And finally, the capsule, the New Shepard, landed on the West Texas desert at a very slow degree of speed. It was a smooth touchdown, and obviously when the 4 passengers came out, they were ecstatic by what they had just experienced. You just heard what Jeff Bezos said about his experience. Sounds like an unforgettable time.
Space seems to be full of billionaires these days. Bezos isn't the first to fly into space. Richard Branson beat him by just over a week. And Elon Musk, I think, is next. What does all of this mean for space tourism?
Well, I think companies involved in this venture and in this space are excited about the possibilities. Branson, of course, lifted off from New Mexico 11 days ago. He had a slightly different configuration, 2 planes that reached a certain altitude, and then his plane basically separated and took off for space then. So what we saw this morning was a little bit different. Bezos' company believes they've got tons of people that are waiting to sign up for future flights. Of course, the 4th seat on this flight was auctioned off for $28 million. They believe that millions of dollars are at play here in the future, at least for these initial flights. 2 more flights are planned for this year here in the U.S. from this launch site in Texas. But Bezos and Blue Origin believe there's lots more to come. There's a tremendous interest, they think, in traveling into space. Various, just private individuals, businesses, that the possibilities really are endless, and that this is really the beginning, the vanguard of that sector of the space economy.
Hendrik Sybrandy in Texas, thank you very much.
Well, the endeavours of Bezos and Branson could make space tourism a more viable prospect. There's no doubt that only a tiny exclusive group can currently reach for the stars. But as technology advances, space travel could become affordable for the masses. Swiss investment bank UBS says that in a decade, the market will be worth at least $20 billion a year. It also expects the overall space industry to more than double in value, from about $400 billion today to $805 billion by 2030. And long-haul plane journeys of more than 10 hours could eventually be replaced by much quicker point-to-point flights using rockets. But not everyone believes that space tourism is a wise investment. Max Lawson is the head of inequality policy at Oxfam International.
Well, I think, going into space, of course, it's exciting, but, we do have some quite significant problems here on Earth, and Jeff Bezos is the world's richest man. He could personally afford to vaccinate the entire planet, and he wouldn't even notice the dent in his bank balance. And yet he prefers to shoot up into space in his phallic space rocket. I suppose I'm excited to see space exploration, but ultimately I'm angry because I think at the current state of the world, to see these billionaire playboys splashing their cash on big, exciting space rockets, I mean, it's pretty disgusting, to be honest.
So what responsibility do you think that billionaires have to use their money for good to help the most vulnerable people in the world?
I think the richest people on the planet have the biggest responsibility. Remember, they didn't earn that money on their own. It's the product of, in Jeff Bezos' case, hundreds of thousands of Amazon workers working every day to deliver him profits. He's got more money than you could spend in 10,000 lifetimes.
But Jeff Bezos personally made the single largest charitable donation last year of $10 billion. So he certainly does give money to good causes. Do you not think he's doing enough?
It's good that Jeff Bezos has given some money away. 10 billion sounds like a lot, but he has $200 billion in his bank account, so he would barely notice. And he also, historically, Amazon is a terrible payer of tax. He pays very low rates of tax. The first duty of a billionaire is to pay their taxes. It's not all about charity and philanthropy. So do I think Jeff Bezos could do far, far more? And maybe he should focus his tremendous talents and energy on helping the world rather than blasting into space.
How valuable can personal contributions be? Do you think they're needed at these times when some are looking at reducing aid budgets, for example, and so much money has, of course, gone towards tackling the pandemic?
Well, philanthropy is important. I mean, look at the impact of Bill Gates' investments in fighting this pandemic. It's a good thing, but it also gives a lot of power to those who are giving the money. That's why taxation and action by governments is so much more preferable. We need to see rich people pay their fair share of taxes, and particularly billionaires. Personally, I'd like to see a one-off excess wealth tax on the world's billionaires who've made an absolute fortune since this pandemic began. Let's kind of claw back that money, which would still leave them incredibly rich, but let's claw back all the money they've made during this pandemic and use that to vaccinate the world, to put shots in the arms of those health workers in Indonesia and Africa who are on the front line right now facing COVID-19 without protection. Let's not leave them to spend it all on space glory projects.
Afghanistan's presidential palace has survived an attack with 3 rockets landing just outside the building in Kabul. It happened during an outdoor prayer gathering led by President Ashraf Ghani to mark the start of the Eid festival.
Allah. Allah.
There were no immediate reports of injuries, while the Taliban has denied any involvement.
Meanwhile, Afghanistan's ambassador to China says the Taliban is welcome to be a part of the country's government, but the violence has to stop. Javeed Kayem was speaking in an exclusive interview to CGTN.
They could stop killing people, civilians. They could do a ceasefire immediately, not only for the sake of fighting, but also for the sake of humanitarian basis. We're fighting COVID-19. Every day people are dying because of that, and we can't reach out to communities because of the fight. This year there's also drought, unfortunately. People are suffering from that. Their agricultural products are doomed and they need some economic activities, and because of the fight that is not happening. Because of those fightings in those areas, people are internally displaced now. So the first thing they could do immediately is just to have at least a ceasefire for the people. More long term, as I said, nobody stopped them from becoming a political power in the country. That's the beauty of a democracy. You can be part of it. We want them to be part of development. They are claiming that they want an Islamic government, Islamic system. The problem is we are already an Islamic government. We are already an Islamic country. When we ask them what type of an Islamic government, they also don't have the response to that because they don't know what they want. So what we want them immediately is ceasefire, and long term to be part of the governments, to be part of the government, go to the elections, to the vote of the people, and if really people vote for them, they can govern the way they want it. They could be a real political force there.
Turkey's President Erdogan has announced plans for a new presidential complex and parliament building to be built in northern Cyprus. Erdogan, who's on a visit to Nicosia, also wants a mosque built in the abandoned resort town of Varosha, close to the border with the southern part of the island. Speaking on the 47th anniversary of the island's partition, he again called for a two-state solution for Cyprus.
Pedro Castillo has been declared president-elect of Peru. The announcement comes weeks after a tightly contested runoff vote. The country's election authority delivered its verdict after reviewing claims of electoral fraud made by his right-wing rival. Castillo, who secured just over 50% of the vote, will be sworn in on July the 28th.
China's Henan province has been hit by heavy rain, bursting riverbanks, flooding cities and trapping people in waist-high water. Flights into the provincial capital, Zhengzhou, have been cancelled and a military division sent in to assist with rescue operations. One person has died and 2 people are reported missing, with many others trapped. More torrential rain is expected in the coming hours.
America's largest active wildfire is so intense it's said to be creating its own weather. Oregon's bootleg fire has now burnt an area larger than Los Angeles. More than 2,000 people have been told to leave or be ready to leave at a moment's notice. The Department of Forestry spokesperson says only 30% of the fire has been contained.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why robots taking over the world is about to move a little bit closer. But even the robots have been hit by the pandemic.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The head of the Tokyo Olympics Organising Committee has not ruled out a last-minute cancellation of the Games. It comes as coronavirus cases rise in the Japanese capital, just days before the opening ceremony.
Meanwhile, the president of Poland's Swimming Federation has apologised after 6 athletes were sent home after an administrative error. 23 Polish swimmers travelled to Japan, but the squad had to be cut down to comply with the rules. Well, this year's Olympics are unique not just because of the pandemic, but also for the number of new sports making their debut in Tokyo.
Karate, skateboarding and surfing will bring high-tempo action to the Games, alongside the new discipline of climbing. Natalie Carney went to meet some young climbers in Germany reaching for Olympic gold.
Using the strength of their entire bodies, these young climbers are competing in speed climbing, one of 3 disciplines in the sport. The rules are simple. Make it to the top of the 15-meter wall in the fastest time.
Lead climbing is about how high an athlete gets, so it's always about the overall climbing height. Then we have bouldering, which is about the attempts that an athlete needs per boulder. And then there is speed climbing, which is mainly about the time.
After being confirmed as an Olympic sport by the IOC in 2016, climbing was first introduced at the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires 2 years later. Using a range of regulated hand and foot holds of different shapes and sizes to climb these Olympic standard vertical walls, the Bavarian Youth Climbing Championships is one step closer to that Olympic dream for many here. After grabbing second place in the male youth speed competition, 16-year-old Puhe Schmiermund is already defining his Olympic strategy.
Yes, of course I would like to be, but I think the problem is if you want to start as an Olympic athlete, you need to be good at all 3 disciplines in climbing, so speed, boulder and lead climbing, and that's pretty hard to be.
15-year-old Rebecca Fröhlich is also climbing for gold later in life, yet she admits she has work to do.
I would, but I don't think that I'm good enough, but you have
to be really concentrated and manage to think the moves in your head.
Concentration is certainly part of it, but there is no denying the strategy, agility, and strength needed, right down to one's fingertips.
In some disciplines, climbers will attach safety ropes. However, no other equipment will be allowed. Climbers will have to climb these walls using only their bare hands and climbing shoes. Now let me tell you, if you've not done this before, the youth might make it look quite easy, but it's far more difficult than it looks.
Only 40 climbing athletes, 20 men and 20 women, will be vying for one of 6 Olympic medals up for grabs in Tokyo. Yet many now believe the popularity of the sport will surely grow with its inclusion in the Olympic Games.
I definitely think that more children are motivated to do this. We are already noticing that more children are coming and smaller ones are coming along and staying. You can already see that.
The climbing competition will take place towards the end of the Games from the 3rd of August to the 6th of August at Tokyo's Aomi Urban Sports Park. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Erlangen, Germany.
There are manoeuvrings afoot in the world of robotics. The Swiss engineering group ABB is to buy the Spanish robotics firm ASTI in a deal that will see it move away from its traditional base in automotive and towards consumer logistics. But its president for robotics has been explaining to me why even robots couldn't escape this pandemic.
Well, our strategy is to grow in many new industries. We started in automotive, and now we're expanding heavily into logistics. And we take the example of logistics, e-commerce. It's an expanding area. We're happy to continue that growth. If you think about when you click that button, I want to order something and I want to have it tomorrow, that puts a lot of challenge on the entire value chain. So with this acquisition, we can enter more into logistics, even healthcare. We have design concepts for laboratories where you have a robot mounted on these movable devices that can bring specimen or even medicine to certain stations and go away from them. So it really enhances our ability to add more productivity to our customers.
Does this signal a move away from automotive, your traditional origins?
Automotive will remain an important sector for us because there is huge potential in growth, for example, in e-vehicles, battery manufacturing, and so on. So we will continue there. But we are expanding in so many new areas. We just announced a couple of weeks ago that we're expanding into construction industry where houses will be prefabricated. Many other areas like food and beverage, even retail is asking for robots. The pandemic has actually accelerated many of the trends that we have seen prior to the pandemic, and lack of workforce and many other things are really demanding more and more automation.
And where does China fit into your plans?
Well, we in robotics are the #1 in China since decades, and ASTI, this company, has a strong foothold here in Europe. And with our acquisition, we will now expand into China. We will build a new factory of these autonomous mobile robots in China, in our existing factory, and we will open up a new facility in 2022, and then we will grow the business not only in China but in Asia as well.
How is the pandemic for you? And I wonder, what is the role of robotics and automation in this global post-pandemic recovery?
Well, Jamie, we did actually a survey at the beginning of the year with more than 1,500 customers and companies, and the outcome was that 85% of them, after the pandemic, said that they will invest more in the next years in robotics than they were planning before. So we see a huge demand because also, you think of logistics, you think all the challenges of this uncertainty. Automation gives you that flexibility and also independence and also nearshoring. So many of these trends are being accelerated. Not new, but we see an increased trend in there. I mean, buying from home is now becoming the normal. And without these mobile devices and with the robots in these fulfillment centers, in logistics centers, customers will not be able to fulfill their tasks.
The headlines again. Germany's Chancellor has visited flood-hit areas, with her government criticised over the lack of warning for those affected.
And the world's richest man lands back on Earth after his 11-minute space flight. Jeff Bezos said it was the best day ever. And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.